Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. This is the post-game podcast for the Timberwolves' 11-point win over the Washington Wizards. Yes, Anthony Edwards had 38. Yes, Rudy had a double-double, and Karl-Anthony Towns had another strong game. But the offense still left something to be desired in this game. They were outshot by the Wizards, and they had to rely on a lot of turnovers from Washington. We'll break the whole thing down here on the show today. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use the code, all lowercase, LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Happy Thursday, everybody. And happy Victory Thursday, and also game day. The Timberwolves play again tonight in Brooklyn, but of course are coming off the win in Washington Wednesday night. We'll break the whole thing down here on the post-game pod today. Lots to get to, as there's lots of pros and also a few cons from this one. It was a bit of a roller coaster of a game, but coming off the Charlotte game, I think we'll take it, right? First of all, a big thank you for those of you that do make Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube. And also wherever you like to listen to podcasts. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can also follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. All right. So coming off the Charlotte game, this was, silly to call a game in January for a team that's tied for first in the Western Conference. They must win. But it kind of felt like it after the reaction to the 62-point Cat performance and loss to one of the worst teams in the league in Charlotte on Monday. By the way, Charlotte lost to Detroit, lost to the Pistons on Wednesday night. So there's that. Anyway, Mike Conley did not play in this game. He was sick. He missed the game the other night with, I forget what, hip soreness and then rest, whatever. This game, he actually was questionable with an illness and did not join the team for this game. So he was out. And I was worried coming into the game. If you listen to Wednesday's show, I talked a little bit during the preview segment about the Warriors and their pace. They push pace. They play at the number one pace in the league. Excuse me, not the Warriors, the Wizards, Washington Wizards, a lot of W's. The Wizards play at the fastest pace in the entire league. And the Timberwolves, with how prone they are to turnovers and also the transition defense, well, much better than last year and really the last couple of years under Chris Finch. The half-court defense is so good that, of course, the transition defense is not up to par. And also, recently here, it's been even worse. So that was a concern of mine. And sure enough, the game started with Washington getting 3 consecutive dunks. The first one was because Jaden McDaniels just didn't run back on defense. It was a defensive rebound. They pushed the pace. McDaniels kind of did I always like to compare it to the Andrew Wiggins kind of lingering around the timeline, like not crashing the glass on the offensive boards, not getting back defensively like he's supposed to, just kind of hanging out. The Wizards get a dunk. Next time down the floor in the half court, Washington gets a dunk, excuse me. It was a combination of Ant not moving his feet enough, Rudy and Cat not communicating, nobody stepping up, the low man not stepping up, and another dunk. Finch calls a timeout after the first 2 dunks. The next Wizards bucket was also a dunk, and I'm pretty sure they had 6 dunks in the first quarter. I was keeping a dunk tally for a while there. And overall, they weren't making other shots. It was dunks and free throws was really all it was in the first quarter for Washington. And the Wolves were still up 6 at the end of the first quarter. The offense was pretty good. There was some flow to it. And really that was kind of the story of the game was the Timberwolves allowed the Wizards to do a little too much offensively. They had 35 points the Wizards did in the second quarter. The Wolves were actually down by 2 points at halftime. But when push came to shove, the Wizards were the team that turned the ball over way too much in this game. Part of it was due to the Wolves defense. They were absolutely no question better than they were against Charlotte on Monday. There's no question about that. There were still too many lapses, but Washington, thankfully, was not up to the challenge. There were moments on Monday where Charlotte legitimately played well, combined with how horrendous the Wolves played. In this game, Washington, there were very few moments where it was like, the Wizards have a shot to hang around in this game. They shot themselves in the foot. 21 turnovers for the Wizards. And the Wolves had 8 steals, but that's a lot of unforced turnovers from Washington too. There were a couple of travels. I think Jordan Poole had a couple of early travels. They stepped out of bounds a couple of times. A lot of sloppy passes, just bad basketball from Washington on the offensive end. And it was kind of interspersed with some strong defense from Minnesota. But early in the game, the Wizards were getting what they wanted in the paint. They were pretty much scoring at will. This is a bottom 5 offense. And the Wolves allowed 59 points in the first half and were down by 2 at halftime. So I can imagine that halftime wasn't all too pleasant in the Wolves locker room. But they came out in the third quarter like they did for so much of the first 2.5, 3 months of the season and outscored the Wizards by 14 in the third quarter, 33-19. They finally clamped down a little bit defensively. And again, the offense had a little bit more flow the longer the game went on. But to me, the action offensively was actually pretty good for Minnesota throughout the game. Even early when they weren't scoring a ton, they just missed a ton of shots, especially in the first half. They probably had a dozen shots go in and out. I'm not exaggerating. Probably 3 or 4 of them were 3-pointers. And then the Wizards had a couple like that on that same bucket in the second half. I almost wonder if that rim was just too tight. It was weird. Like there were a bunch of shots that just went in and out for Minnesota. And again, the ball movement at times I almost thought they were overpassing. The Wolves were, which oftentimes leads to turnovers. It didn't necessarily in this game. They only had 7 on the game, believe it or not. But they just missed open shots, and that happens sometimes. So the offensive performance to me was actually pretty good in this game. The problem was the shot making, 42% for the field for Minnesota. And by the way, the Wizards ended up at 48.1%. The Wolves were only 9 of 32 on 3-point attempts. And they weren't just like launching crazy, like contested shots either. Cat and Ant combined to shoot just 5 of 20 from 3. The rest of the team was 4 of 12. So nobody shot it well. And had some volume attempts towards the end of the game. I mean, at the very end, he was trying to get to 40 points. He finished with 38. But I thought that for the most part, the shot selection for Minnesota and the offensive execution was good. It was just the actually making the shots, which of course is, I'm going to say, more than half the battle, right? But because they dominated the glass, and we'll talk more about that here in a minute, because they had 15 offensive rebounds in this game and Gobert played extremely well, that allowed them to, still ultimately win this game. But again, improvement from Monday. The defensive effort was better. The transition defense, save for the first few possessions of the game, was much, much, much better. The effort level was so much higher. And the ball movement on offense, the passing, the shot selection was far superior to the Hornets game. The shot making just wasn't all that much better than the Charlotte game. And that's the only reason why this thing was even really close towards the end of the game. I want to move on to talking a little bit about a couple things in the box score that really stand out, things the Wolves did well, and things that, I was hoping they'd be able to hang their hat on against this call it what it is, lowly Wizards team, right? The 3rd worst record in the entire league. Charlotte, of course, is the 4th worst team. But actually, the Wizards have the 2nd worst record. They're 1 loss behind the Spurs now. So, yeah, I mean, like, things that I was hoping the Wolves could hang their hat on, and they did in this game. So we'll get to that next, and then we'll do individual studs and duds. And all that is coming up next year on the show. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our new friends over at Grammarly. When it comes to writing, Grammarly is there to support you from start to finish. I know I write a lot, even prepping graphics for the podcast. I write a lot for work. There's just tons of stuff. Whenever you're on the computer, it's easy to make some of those, classic rushing typo type mistakes. And now for over 10 years, Grammarly has been powered by AI technology you can trust to help you across all the places where you write the most. When you're stuck with writing at work, Grammarly can help you get started with ideas, outlines, and tips. You can ask it to give you 10 possible taglines for a video thumbnail. You can ask it to help you improve or shorten what you've written, or even just to summarize your emails and provide suggestions on how to reply to emails in seconds. If you have a big presentation coming up at work or school, let Grammarly create a personalized outline to get you organized so you can transform your ideas into a compelling presentation. Need to draft an important email? Don't know where to start? Grammarly has suggestions to jumpstart your writing. The best part is that it's free to use. Start being more productive at work. Go to Grammarly.com/podcast to download for free today. That's Grammarly, Grammarly.com/podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is also brought to us by our friends over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. They are the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch your winnings roll in. Basketball season is more than halfway over now, and there's still 2 weeks left of NFL football. You can pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League. Even this weekend, the Chiefs are playing on Conference Championship Sunday. You could take LeBron James and Travis Kelce at a 10.5-point combo, 3-pointers made plus receptions, pick more than or less than, and watch your winnings roll in. Plus, Prize Picks offers a reboot policy, so your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use the code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA, code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right. Some key takeaways and some areas that the Wolves really dominated in this game. And again, areas in which I expected them to dominate. We talked on the preview segment on Wednesday's Locked On Wolves episode. The Wizards are the dead last rebounding team in the league on both ends of the floor. They're 30th in offensive rebound rate. They're 30th in defensive rebound rate. No matter how you slice it, they're a miserable rebounding basketball team. I expected the Timberwolves to win the battle on the glass and in the paint in this game. And if you look at the numbers, and I'm throwing the graphic up if you're watching on YouTube, Minnesota was actually a -1 when it came to total rebounds in this game. However, they had 8 more offensive rebounds than the Washington Wizards. Minnesota had 15 offensive rebounds, 7 of them from Rudy Gobert, a couple each for Jaden McDaniels and Shake Milton, believe it or not. Minnesota controlling the offensive glass was a huge part of this game. It allowed them to get a ton of second chance opportunities. And, frankly, with how poorly they were shooting the ball, obviously there was a higher volume of available offensive rebounds. The offensive rebound rate probably isn't that great from this game, but the volume of offensive rebounds that they actually corralled and suppressing Washington's defensive rebounds, the fact that the Wolves missed, 58 shots in this game and Washington only grabbed 42 defensive rebounds, that's not a great defensive rebound percentage for your opponent. Hence, they're the league's worst defensive rebound team by rate. So a strong performance on the offensive glass for Minnesota, and you need that when you're shooting the ball as poorly as they did. And that's exactly what they did in this game. So +8 in terms of offensive rebounds. We talked a little bit about turnovers already. Minnesota had just 7 turnovers, despite being, one of the league's worst. I think coming into the game, they were second in the 29th. Maybe briefly they were 30th in terms of turnover percentage. Offensively, Minnesota was just 7 committed turnovers in this game. Washington committed 21, and they came into this game pretty middle of the pack. They actually don't turn it over that much normally. You'd expect that they would because they have 7 wins on the year, but they're only 14th coming into the game in terms of offensive turnover rate. But they turned it over 21 times. Again, the Wolves had 8 steals, so they did contribute to that, but they benefited from Washington being really sloppy with the ball. The second piece of this, of course, is the points off of turnovers, which, isn't perfect, and it's a little bit noisy, and sometimes I think it's a little bit misleading. But Washington had enough live ball turnovers that the Wolves got a ton of fast break opportunities out of this. Minnesota won points off turnovers in this game. Get this, 32-4. Minnesota had 32 points off of 21 Washington turnovers, which is almost exactly a 1.5 per possession off Washington turnovers, which is really, really good. Washington, on the other hand, had only 4 points off of 7 Timberwolves turnovers. So a little bit of good fortune there, and also a lack of execution from Washington's side offensively, but a good job turning defense into offense for Minnesota in the open floor. Overall, Minnesota was only a +3 on fast break points, but they just simply capitalized on 21 Wizards turnovers. Huge. Talked a little bit already about how bad of a shooting night this was for Minnesota. And again, more about just missing shots than it was about execution. Only 28% from three doesn't worry me too much. They did get to the line 29 times, which was huge. The Wolves shot the ball. They were 25 of 29 from the free throw line. I'll throw this back up on YouTube as well, the graphic. They were 25 of 29 from the line. Washington was 23 of 29, which, they had 2 more points than Washington there, but it helped. Washington made 1 more three-pointer than Minnesota. So those categories kind of canceled out because the Wolves did make their free throws. Rudy Gobert was 5 of 6 at the line, which is unusual for him. Cat only attempted 3 free throws. Ant was 13 of 14 at the line. And it was just kind of this cascade of Ant drives, especially early in the game, but he really kept it up throughout. So I thought overall, again, Minnesota's offense operated well. They took advantage of sloppy Wizards turnovers, and they were out, in transition on the fast break frequently enough in this game to do some real damage. And despite it being a bad shooting night, the offensive rebounds we talked about, then also the pace that this game was played at, other than very early in the first quarter, the Wolves did not allow this thing to get too out of hand in terms of pace. And that was really important because it was really, I said this on the previous show Wednesday, the Wizards' only real shot in a game like this is to force there to be or generate, enough possessions overall in the game that they just have a chance to score more points and get easy points in transition and, everything that comes along with that. Speed the game up, right? Minnesota actually plays at a fairly slow pace. Yes, they can play fast, but it gets a little bit dangerous when they do. And the Wolves did a really good job in this game of not allowing the Wizards to get them out over their skis too much in terms of pace. And ultimately that helped lead to a Minnesota win. Now, to be clear, and I alluded to this earlier, the Timberwolves were absolutely saved to a point by how bad the Wizards are. Washington squandered lots of opportunities in this game. Minnesota missed a lot of shots and allowed Washington to get some easy buckets. I talked about the 6 first quarter dunks, 3 in the first 3 offensive possessions for Washington, or I guess 2 in the first 2 offensive possessions, and their first 3 made buckets were all dunks. And also Minnesota, I talked about all the shots that went in and out from the perimeter. They also missed a lot of layups, which is as much more execution than it is bad luck, right? Washington lucked out. The Wolves lucked out with how bad Washington was in some other facets like the turnovers. And clearly the Wizards squandered a lot of opportunities in this game. So overall, it was both, right? The Wolves played better than they did Monday. The execution on both ends was significantly better. The final product was not a whole lot better, but because the opponent was much worse and because the offensive flow was better and allowed them to get more free throw attempts, Ant obviously played much, much better than his 9-point performance when he was under the weather on Monday. Ant, we'll talk more about him in a minute, but he turned in a 38-point performance, and I thought played really well in this game too. So, and also a really good Cat game. I want to talk about that next too. So, perfect segue. That's actually how we'll close the shows. We'll do individual studs and duds, and that's how we'll close the show here today. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Hungryroot. Are you trying to eat a little bit healthier in 2024? Hungryroot is here to rescue you from short-lived resolutions by making meal planning easy and nutritious. Build healthy habits that won't disappear by February with Hungryroot. Whether you're braving the cold or dealing with crowds, grocery shopping this time of year could be the worst. Why not stay home and let Hungryroot handle it? With Hungryroot, you can kickstart a week of healthy eating and get groceries delivered right to your door. Hungryroot is the easiest way to get fresh, high-quality food delivered to your door. They've got healthy groceries and simple recipes all in one place. You can take a fun short quiz. I did this with my wife. It is genuinely fun to take this quiz. Hungryroot will get to know you, your goals, and how you like to eat. They'll ask what flavors you like, what kitchen appliances you like to use the most, and more. Then they'll keep your needs and preferences top of mind and start building your cart with delicious recipes and all your grocery needs for the week. They'll recommend recipes and groceries based on your taste. Take their suggestions or choose anything you want. They've got fresh produce, high-quality meat and seafood, pantry staples, healthy snacks and sweets, and much more. Hungryroot goes beyond your weekly grocery haul with thousands of easy recipes that actually put your groceries to good use before they get forgotten in the back of your fridge, which has absolutely been a problem for us at times. The best part is Hungryroot follows a simple standard. It's got to taste good, be quick to make, and contain whole, trusted ingredients. Spend less time meal planning, shopping, and cooking, and more time enjoying healthy food that you'll actually love with Hungryroot. Right now, Hungryroot is offering Locked On NBA NBA listeners, 40% off your free delivery and free veggies for life. Just go to hungryroot.com/lockedon to get 40% off your first delivery and get your free veggies. That's hungryroot.com/lockedon. Don't forget to use our link so they know that we sent you. All right, let's close this thing out with individual studs and duds. And we talked a little bit already about Cat and Ant. Let's start with Ant. Ant had 38 in this game, which coming off his 9-point on 11 shot, I think, performance on Monday. This was really good to see. Obviously, he was under the weather Monday. Take that into account. But 38 points, 11 to 28 shooting, not the most efficient shooting night. In fact, there were a couple of shot attempts. Like, if I were ranking the studs, I would say Cat had the best game of any of the Wolves. Cat and Rudy both played better than Ant, but I'm starting with Ant because he scored 38. Ant, at times in this game, he's still looking to find the right balance, right? When he's creating, when he's got the ball in his hands late in games, it's like he's not like he only turned it over once in the fourth quarter in this game. He finished with 4 turnovers to 5 assists. He only had 1 turnover in the fourth quarter, and it was actually during a pretty dicey stretch for Minnesota. Actually, real quick, during this stretch, this was like with 3 minutes left. The Wolves, let's see, Denny Avdia had a 3-point play. This was a 7-point game. Cat comes in, misses a 3. The Wizards come down. Jordan Poole misses like a 30-footer that would have made it a 4-point game. Then on the other end, Ant essentially dribbles the ball off his foot again, just gets the ball taken from him by Marvin Bagley. And the Wizards come down 7. Gobert fouls Marvin Bagley, and he's got a chance to put them down just 6, or excuse me, it would have been 5. And then again, an example of the Wizards not being very good. Bagley misses both free throws. So, the Wizards blow a open 3 from Poole. They blow the 2 missed free throws after the Wolves turn it over. Then there's still a bit of a back and forth there where neither team can score before Gobert ends up, making a bucket. Then Ant does, and it's a bit of a back and forth in, both teams scoring at the end of the game. But that stretch where Ant turned it over was the scariest stretch. It was kind of teetering from becoming a 3-possession game to a 2-possession game with under 3 minutes to play. And it was kind of like there were a couple of other plays like that where Ant didn't turn it over, but he just he had an open pass, and he was clearly the Wizards are loading up. Like, teams are loading up against Ant, especially late in games. And almost like I talked about this earlier in the year, it's not a true double when he's not in pick and roll, right? If Ant's in isolation, they'll bring almost like playing with 1.5 guys. And then everybody kind of shifts a half slot over. So it's not a true loading the floor completely, but it's just enough to make Ant think he's got space. And then as soon as he goes, back to the basket or he spins to shoot that turnaround, a second guy's coming. And then usually it's too late for him to safely pass it off to a teammate. He might throw essentially a pick 6 to the other team. Those are the types of, that's the way teams are trying to defend Ant, and it's mostly working. Sometimes he makes the really tough shot, but a lot of the time he turns it over or attempts a really tough shot. So it's finding that balance, which is, of course, that's like the $1 million problem to solve, right? And Ant is still working on it, understandably. But he took some ill-advised shots in this game, especially in the fourth quarter, per usual, and it kind of tamped down what his effectiveness could be in terms of his efficiency. 38 points on 28 shots, 3 of 10 on threes, 13 of 14 at the line. So super efficient in getting to the line and making his free throws, which was good to see. 5 assists, 4 turnovers, 3 rebounds, and a steal for Ant in this game. Cat was fantastic. 27 points on 11 of 24. He was only 2 of 8 outside the arc, but he was 9 of 14 on 2-point attempts. I think only shot a couple of mid-range 2s and made both of them. Only got to the line 3 times. Probably should have gotten there more. 3 of 3 at the line. There were a lot of fouls called in this game in general, but somehow Cat only attempted 3 free throws. Just 6 rebounds for Cat, but I thought he played really well. 3 assists, 1 block, and 1 turnover. Just 1 turnover. It was a plus 26. Now, I talk about this all the time. I don't love single game plus minus. Nobody on the Wolves had a number above a plus 10 except for Cat, and he was a plus 26 in 35 minutes in a game the Wolves only won by 11. Part of that speaks to the effectiveness or lack thereof of Kyle Anderson and Reid in this game, but Cat was great. Really, really good game for Karl-Anthony Towns. My third stud's going to be Rudy Gobert. Another really strong Rudy game, 19 and 16. Those 7 offensive boards I mentioned earlier, plus 4 blocks and 0 turnovers in this game for Rudy. And he made 5 of his 6 free throw attempts. hard to find a better stat line for Rudy than 19, 16, and 4, 7 of 11 from the field, and 5 of 6 at the free throw line. Really strong game for Rudy. Impacted the game defensively per usual. I don't have any real duds in this game. Shake Milton wasn't great. Once again, he played 19 minutes off the bench. He was actually, 8th on the team in minutes in this game. 1 of 5 shooting, misses only 3-point attempt, continues to look awkward shooting threes. He did have 3 assists, though, and a steal and a block, plus a couple offensive rebounds. So he did some other stuff. His one bucket was like a weird tip-in in the second half. So a weird Shake game, I guess. Nas wasn't great, but, it was fine. Kyle Anderson, again, I didn't think played that well, but you look up and he's got 5 assists and no turnovers. So, again, a quiet bench game scoring-wise that combined to score just 15 points in this one. But, no real duds. Like, I thought this was generally a well-rounded Timberwolves performance, once it was all said and done. All right, that's all we really have for this one. The Wolves play again against Brooklyn on tonight, Thursday night. So, Wolves Nets. Brooklyn does not play on Wednesday night. I'm like 99% sure, but now I'm making sure because, they don't play Wednesday. So Brooklyn's not on a back-to-back. Minnesota, of course, is traveling up from D.C. to Brooklyn. Not that that's a super long flight, but they get to take out a Brooklyn team that overall has really been struggling lately. They've lost 2 in a row. They've lost 6 out of their last 7. And going back even further than that, they've lost 11 of their last 13. And if you want to go back even further, they won 2 games right before that, this recent stretch, and they were both against the Pistons. So if you want to include that, go back even further than 11 out of 13. And they've lost 16 out of 16 out of 20. 2 of those wins against the Pistons. Now, their other 2 are the Lakers and the Thunder. Remember, they beat the Thunder not that long ago, too. So you got to look out. They're a decent enough team. Obviously, Mikal Bridges is a challenge, and so we'll see what happens when the Wolves head to Brooklyn for the one and only time this season here on Thursday night. We'll of course have the postgame pod for you Friday, and the live postcast will be Jack Borman, editor-in-chief of Cato Supis, along with Luke Inman on the Locked On Sports Minnesota YouTube channel, and then the audio right here at Locked On Wolves as well. And again, we'll be live, or not live, but that will be live, but I'll have the postcast for you, the post-game podcast for you on Friday after Wolves Nets. That's all we have for you today. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow an X at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your favorite, or Locked On Podcast Network. The Locked On Network is your local experts on the biggest stories. Hopefully also your favorite podcast and your favorite podcast network. That's all we have for you today. We'll see you for the postcast late Thursday and then also the postgame pod on Friday. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.